Hello, this is Joseph Rodolfi, and in this video I'll be discussing the blood flow of the heart. Please excuse my drawing as I'm not the best artist, and please excuse my writing. I don't have the best handwriting. I do plan to, however, provide a detailed explanation of this image. Before I get started, I'll first go over some of the labeled parts. So right over here is this is called the right ventricle, and this is the left ventricle, and these are two different chambers of the heart. Over here is the right atrium. This is the left atrium over here. This is called the pulmonary semilunar valve right over here, and this is called the aortic semilunar valve. And these are both AV valves. This is called the tricuspid valve, and this is called the mitral or bicuspid valve. Over here, these little string-like structures are called chordae tendineae, and they're attached to these things called papillary muscles. The papillary muscles are responsible for pulling on the chordae tendineae, which pull on the valves, which are essentially what open and close them. Over here, we have a superior vena cava, or vena cava, and this is the inferior vena cava. And that brings blood to the right atrium over here. This is called the ascending aorta right over here. This is the pulmonary trunk, and then this is the left pulmonary artery. This is the right pulmonary artery. These are the left pulmonary veins, and these are the right pulmonary veins. First, let's go ahead and discuss the blood flow of the heart. I'll break it down step by step. So deoxygenated blood flows into the right atrium, which is this chamber right here, through either the superior vena cava or the inferior vena cava. And keep in mind, this is full of carbon dioxide and is very low in oxygen. From the right atrium, blood flows through this little AV valve here. This is called the tricuspid valve, and this is pretty much what allows it to go from the right atrium into the right ventricle over here. When the ventricles contract, of course, this blood will flow from the right ventricle through the pulmonary semilunar valve, which is this little flap here. That will take it through the pulmonary trunk, which will lead to the pulmonary arteries going away from the heart to the lungs. That is going to be deoxygenated blood. When it gets to the lungs, it goes through capillaries, and that allows gas exchange to occur. So in the lungs, carbon dioxide is released, and then oxygen is picked up for cellular respiration. That blood is now oxygenated, and it returns to the heart through the pulmonary veins, which are these little things right over here, into the left atrium. Next, the blood passes through the mitral valve, also known as the bicuspid valve, into the left ventricle. And keep in mind, this is all oxygen-rich blood now. Finally, the oxygenated blood is ejected out of the left ventricle into the aortic semilunar valve, into the aorta itself, and through the arteries that go to the rest of the body. So this pretty much here pumps blood from the heart all the way through the aortic semilunar valve to the rest of the body. And so that's why this wall is very thick right here compared to this one, because you need a lot more force to push blood from the heart to everywhere else in the body. So I previously mentioned the path of blood flow through the heart, but I didn't explain how the heart pumps blood on each side simultaneously. So I'm getting ready to discuss the electrical pathway of the heart. But before I do want to mention that the heart works as a double pump. What I basically mean is that the heart is pumping through each side, the right and the left, at the same time. So when the right atrium contracts, the left atrium also contracts. When the right ventricle contracts, so does the left ventricle. As blood is pushed from the right ventricle through the pulmonary semilunar valve to the lungs, blood is also pushed from the left ventricle through the aortic semilunar valve to the rest of the body. And we can kind of, see this because the valves play a role in directing the blood flow, obviously. This can be observed through the sound the heart makes. Sometimes people mistakenly think that the sound of the heart is the muscles contracting. However, muscles do not make sounds when they contract. The lub-dub noise you hear is actually different sets of valves closing shut. Normal heartbeat sounds come in pairs and are often described as a constant lub-dub, lub-dub, lub-dub. The first lub is actually both the mitral and the tricuspid valves slamming shut at the same time. The dub noise, the softer one that comes after, is actually the two semilunar valves from the aortic and the pulmonary semilunar valves slamming shut at the same time as well. And when both AV valves close shut, that happens when the ventricles contract, meaning the blood is being squeezed from the right ventricle and the left ventricle at the same time. But the dub noise is actually when the heart is relaxed. The heart doesn't make a significant noise when the atria contract. The contractions of the atria are relatively quiet compared to the forceful contractions of the ventricles. The main sounds you hear when listening to a heartbeat are the lub and the dub sounds, which are primarily produced by, as I said, by the closing of the valves between the atria ventricles and between the ventricles and the arteries. Okay, this is going to be my diagram I'm going to use to help describe the electrical pathway of the heart. So the heart has an electrical pathway. I've labeled different parts 1, 2, 3, and 4 to kind of help make it a little more easier to understand. Number 1 is located around the region where our pacemaker is. This is also called the sinoatrial node, aka SA node. Number 2 is where the atrioventricular node is. This is also known as the AV node. And this is where the electrical gateway is to the ventricles. Number 3 is where the atrioventricular bundle, also known as the AV bundle, is. This can also be referred to as the bundle of His. This works as a pathway for electrical signals to travel from the AV node through the interventricular septum over here, down towards the apex of the heart. Number 4 is where the Purkinje fibers are. They spread upward from the apex through the ventricular myocardium right there. And these little red dots, I just kind of want to explain what that is. So when blood fills the atrium, the water and the electrolytes, in this case it would be sodium ions, in the blood act as a conductor of electricity. This electrical current activates the AV node, which then starts to depolarize, but it doesn't do that until this fills up with blood. The SA node, also known as the pacemaker, is where the electrical and the activity of the heart begins. This electricity spreads through the atria on both sides. That's why you have the green dots here, causing them to contract. It's important that the atria contract before the ventricles do to ensure effective blood flow. To achieve this, the AV node over here acts as a gateway, slowing down the electrical impulses before allowing them to pass through the ventricles. This delay gives the atria enough time to contract and push blood down into the ventricles, allowing them to fill. From the AV node, the electrical impulses travel through the AV bundle, then branch into right and left branches at the interventricular septum. And then at the tips of these branches, we have these things, as I mentioned, called Purkinje fibers. The electrical activity finishes. The flow of electricity follows a specific path from the septum down to the apex, then up to the outer walls of the ventricles, causing them to contract and push blood up into the great vessels. This is an EKG or ECG, which stands for electrocardiogram. It doesn't measure the contraction of the heart necessarily, but rather the combined electricity between the nodal and non-nodal cells within the heart. The electrocardiogram still provides us with information of what is happening within the heart. If we can understand what's going on electrically, we can usually understand what areas are contracting. I will go ahead and explain the details of the waves and what is occurring during this cardiac cycle. The first one we're going to look at is this thing called the P wave. During the P wave, the atria depolarize as a result of the SA node, which acts as the pacemaker. This is also the time when the atria start to fill up with blood. Now, this thing called the PR interval represents the delay at the AV node and the filling of the ventricles. It is the duration between the P wave and the start of the QRS complex, and signifies the time taken for the atrial depolarization and the conduction through the AV node before the ventricles depolarize. Then, during the QRS complex, which is this over here, and it's labeled down here, during the QRX complex, the AV node depolarizes and the depolarization spreads through the ventricles, causing ventricular systole, which is contraction. At the same time this is happening, the atria are repolarizing, which would sometimes be called atrial diastole. When analyzing the ECG waveform, the Q to the R section represents the opening of the ventricles, while the R to the S section signifies the contraction of the ventricles. Over here is where you'll have the lub sound, and the lub sound corresponds to the closure of the AV valves, which occurs at the peak of the R wave over here. This closure is crucial to prevent blood backflow to the atrium and allows for efficient ejection of blood from the ventricles. And then we have this next section here called the ST segment, which is from here to here. The ST segment is when the ventricles start to repolarize. This blue wave you see right here is called the T wave, and the T wave on an EKG represents the repolarization of the ventricles, which is the process of returning the membrane potential back to a negative value after depolarization. This can be thought of as the ventricles returning to their resting state of relaxation phase, also known as diastole. During diastole, the ventricles are relaxed and under less pressure, causing the semilunar valves to close, resulting in the second heart sound, the dub. That would be somewhere around over here. That would be shortly after the T wave appears. When taking someone's blood pressure, there are two numbers to consider. The higher number is called systolic pressure, which represents the pressure when the heart ventricles are contracting. The lower number is called the diastolic pressure, which represents the pressure when the ventricles are relaxing. So we can see that this region is systole and the region is diastole. So this is systole and this is diastole. This is diastole over here. And like I said, right as the T wave starts again, the ventricles relax, which means that this is now in diastole.